You are watching DHTV from California State University, Dominguez Hills.
Now let's start segment 3, the U.S. occupation of Mexico, part 3, resistance. Now we are getting closer to an appreciation of the experiences and the expressions both Native peoples and Mexicans witnessed and created as the United States initiated its occupation of newly acquired territory. So let us pause and review the concepts introduced at the outset of this course, and let's apply them to what we are about to witness as the greatest march of economic expansion ever orchestrated on the world's scene, marked by civilization's evolution. Let's visit Disneyland's fantasy. And please recognize that communities facing prejudice, discrimination, segregation, ethnocide, and genocide respond in diverse patterns to their oppressive reality. Some assimilate, many accommodate and adapt, and a significant minority resist. So I'm bringing back together all of at the beginning of this presentation, I talked about all the beans. And I talked about the racialization process. So let's understand again the racialization process as we bring this class to a conclusion. And before appreciating the dynamics involved in U.S. economic expansion and Mexican labor contributions to U.S. hegemonic control of the Southwest and Latin America by the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, it's important to explore dimensions of resistance to oppression that was occasioned by recalcitrant individuals and groups struggling to survive the injustice that was perpetrated after the U.S. war with Mexico. Remember, in the American national psyche, Mexicans are losers. Mexico lost. So students, please recognize that acute disillusionment robs life of its meaning. And people facing discrimination and hatred have to find a new system of explanation for their predicament. They have to find a rationale for action that has to be created self-consciously. So, let's deal with patience with adversity, a truly Christian virtue. They are called to reconcile their history. They are called to reconcile their existence. Now, let's remember that ethnicity is not primarily ideological or political, rather it is social and cultural. So I wish to explore with you the following individual experiences and review controversial events that help us appreciate human response to adversity and how ethnicity and the racialization process can lead to expressions of nationalism and political ideology. Let's get to know Juan Cortina, Joaquin Murrieta, Tiburcio Vázquez, and Las Gorras Blancas. These people help us appreciate patience with adversity. This is a cardinal virtue. They also help us understand the difference between ethnicity and nationalist expressions. Now let's take Juan Cortina. Now, Juan Cortina, at 22 years of age in 1846, is a man of landed estate from Tamaulipas. And Tamaulipas formed part of South Texas. Original when Mexico was independence, Tamaulipas was part of Texas, as was Coahuila, as was Chihuahua. Texas was just a strip of land on the eastern part of Texas, what is known as Texas today. So this man, Juan Cortina, was recruited in the Mexican army and asked to form a force of soldiers that he solicited from surrounding ranches. So his irregular cavalry regiment, he had a group of people that he armed during the Mexican War. And they participated in the war against the United States in the battles of Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma. It is conjectured that he tolerated John Riley's St. Patrick's Battalion in his realm of influence. Now, with the signing of the Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty, Cortina became involved in Texas politics because part of his land base was now in Texas. And he sided with the South Texas Democratic Party. And in the process, his land claims in the United States became invalidated. Now, he had trouble with lawyers and judges of Brownsville, Texas, that led him to exclaim, "Flocks of vampires in the guise of men robbed Mexicans of their property, incarcerated, chased, murdered, and hunted them like wild beasts." Cortina decided to defend Mexican rights by gathering, training an army of private military forces to resist the eviction of Tejanos from their lands. He was viewed as a hero amongst the local population. He was looked upon as a hero against the abuse of the Anglos. He participated in what Anglo-Texans record as the Cortina Wars, episodes confronting racial violence with armed resistance. He participated in the defense of the United States against the Confederate forces organized in Texas during the Civil War, and he defended Mexico against the French occupation, being present at the execution of Maximiliano in Querétaro. So this man is worthy of our attention in this class because he believed in human rights and economic democracy, especially for all people of color. Now, the corrido is a popular narrative song and poetry form. It is a ballad, the corrido. Now, songs are often about oppression. Songs are often about history. They are often about the daily life for common people, workers, and other socially important information. And that's what the corrido is. The corrido is still a popular form today. Well, it was widely popular during the late 19th and early 20th centuries because corridos documented the life of marginalized peoples. So we're going to go to one of the first corridos on Juan Cortina. And it is performed by Sergio Abundis. Now, the words are in Spanish, but they convey the message that I have shared with you on Cortina, because Cortina confronted racial violence with armed resistance, took up arms against the violence. As he shared, flocks of vampires in the guise of men robbed Mexicans of their property, incarcerated, chased, murdered, and hunted them like wild beasts. So he decided to defend Mexican rights by gathering, training, and arming a private military force to resist the eviction of Tejanos from their land. So let's go to a corrido on Juan Cortina. The words are in Spanish, but they convey the message that I have shared with you on Cortina.
México sufre un despojo y digo con Cortina. gringos, pistola y carabina. Que viva Juan el Pomoceno, que trae para los gringos, pistola y doble freno. Que viva Juan el Pomoceno, que trae para los gringos, pistola y doble freno. Que viva Juan el Pomoceno, que trae para los gringos, pistola y doble freno.
Now let's go to another man named Joaquin Murrieta. Joaquin Murrieta lived between 1829 to 1853. He is a legendary figure in California, known amongst Latinos as the Mexican Robin Hood. He is infamous as a resistance leader amongst Mexicans, but as Americans look at anybody who resists to survive, as Americans look at any Mexican or Native American that's resisting or surviving, they call them bandits, they call them renegades, they call them savages. Of course, they're resisting the racism. So anybody who resists the racialization process is going to be considered negative in American eyes. So that is the fact that they are considered bandits. And so Juan Cortina, a bandido, he was the bandit. Joaquin Murrieta is a bandit. But Joaquin Murrieta is an inspiration for the fictional character we come to know as Zorro. And regardless of his origin, whether he came from Chile, a country located in South America, or the state of Sonora in Mexico, in northern Mexico, Murrieta faced racism and discrimination while seeking his fortune during the California gold rush created by Congress in 1849. According to one chronicler, so many tales have grown up around Murrieta that it is hard to disentangle the fabulous from the factual. There seems to be consensus that Anglos drove him from a rich mining claim and that in rapid succession his wife was raped, his half-brother lynched, and Murrieta himself horsewhipped. He may have worked as a money dealer for a time. Then, according to whichever version one accepts, he either became a horse trader, an occasional horse thief, or a bandit. And that is his reputation. A poster advertising the display of the supposed head of Murrieta in Stockton, California in 1853 eventually calmed the white American population and its guilt of its invasion of California. And supposedly his pickled head was destroyed in the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. Now, what would you do if you saw your spouse raped, if you saw your brother lynched, and you were beaten up and railroaded to jail, and the good citizens proudly proclaimed that? What would you do? Especially when you tried to seek justice through the court system. Now let's go to the History Channel's romanticization with Murrieta.
He was Hollywood's first swashbuckling hero. Black was his cape and his mask. His mark, undeniable.
He was a justified hero.
A Robin Hood, a lover.
For men, it's someone to emulate, and for women, someone that you want in your bed.
But did you know that the legend of Zorro was based on a real man?
Zorro is a fictional hero, though he was born out of real characters like Joaquin Murrieta.
This is the story of the man behind the mask of Zorro. Gold. The magic lure of the ages beckoned. Fortune hunters from every corner of the world underwent epic adventures to reach the rivers of gold.
One of the great coincidences of history is that 2 weeks before the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, in which California became part of the United States, the gold was discovered.
Despite its questionable origins, the Mexican-American War was over, and Mexico lost California along with what is now known as the Southwest to the United States. The discovery of gold, however, did not become public until after February 2nd, the date of the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. It was announced that gold was discovered on the day they signed their country away.
Siempre soñaba yo a ser americano. Hasta que los conocí.
So he and his brothers got together and they decided to seek their own justice. And in the process, they became outlaws.
Bueno, mis compadres, vamos a reconquistar California para nuestra gente.
The West badly needed a hero, and had none at the time.
And when we don't encounter the heroes that we need in our lives, it will take a real human being and transform the lifetime of that real human being into the myth that it needs to be. Joaquin has been credited with inspiring not just the image of Zorro, but by extension the image of Batman, which takes him, a real person, into mythological territory.
And the fact that he doesn't have any magic powers, that he has to rely on being smart and being skillful and being a good fencer and that kind of thing is really appealing, because it means that anybody could become Zorro. We cannot be Superman, we cannot be Spider-Man, but we can be Zorro given the right or the wrong circumstances.
Joaquin has become a symbol of something else, and of everything we love and fear, of everything we admire and loathe, of everything that represents what is good and everything that represents what is bad.
He wouldn't be a legend at all if he was just a bandit.
The only reason he turned is because the law would not help him.
And then there is the mythical hero, Murrieta or Zorro, who speaks for the oppressed.
It was not yet in the world a recognizable political expression of what Joaquin Murrieta ultimately represented. Joaquin Murrieta is the cry against racism. Joaquin Murrieta is a cry against crimes against humanity. Joaquin Murrieta is a cry against the outrages committed against men and women and children, all in the pursuit of individual profit.
So the myth grows to embody the feeling of a race.
Joaquin Murrieta is a poetic concoction, an image, a symbol, and a myth that will feed generations to come.
Okay, Joaquin Murrieta. Let's visit another aspect of Zorro in a man known as Tiburcio Vázquez. Because when you combine Joaquin Murrieta with Tiburcio Vázquez, you get the character of Zorro. But let's go to Tiburcio Vázquez. He was born in 1835 and will die in 1875. Had a brief 40-year existence, but Tiburcio Vázquez is going to be known for harassing Anglo communities of Northern California between 1857 to 1874. Now, what's unique about Tiburcio Vázquez was that he was of landed wealth from Monterrey. He was fluent in both English and Spanish, which facilitated his social movement amongst conflicting Anglo and Mexican elite economic circles. And at the age of 17, Tiburcio Vázquez will witness the murder of a constable in a fight at a Mexican celebration. He denied any involvement and he fled, and he became an outlaw. The sheriffs eventually captured him for rustling horses since 1856, and after spending 5 years in San Quentin prison, he tried an honest life only to be captured after a robbery in 1867. He was sent to prison, and in 1871 he participated in a stagecoach robbery. And again, he gained notoriety as a result of 3 innocent bystanders being killed in the process. A $1,000 reward is going to be placed on his head. He moved to Southern California to hide out from Northern California. And from his hideout, he participated in a robbery in Fresno County. This landed him a $15,000 state legislative mandate to bring him to justice. So posses were formed, and they went hunting for him, and he was captured May 13th in 1874. Now, Vasquez would claim that his crimes were the result of discrimination by the Norteamericanos, in his words, and he insisted that he was a defender of Mexican rights. He also insisted that he was an honorable man and that he claimed that he never killed anyone. He admitted he was an outlaw, but he denied he had ever killed anyone. And in January 1875, he's going to be sentenced to hang for murder. Visitors will flock to his jail cell, many of them women. And at the age of 39, he was hanged on March 17th, 1875. And one of his final statements before his death, he shared that a spirit of hatred and revenge took possession of me. I had numerous fights in defense of what I believed to be my rights and those of my countrymen. I believed we were unjustly deprived of the social rights that belonged to us. And we're going to go to a work-in-progress documentary on Tiburcio Vasquez by Charlie Trujillo. He never really got to finish this documentary, but nonetheless, it's one of perhaps the best interpretations so far. And in this short clip, Trujillo attempts to put resistance in proper perspective for us by having to take a look at Tiburcio Vasquez. Let's go to Tiburcio Vasquez.
Soy americano, pero comprendo el inglés. Yo lo aprendí con mi hermano, al derecho y al revés. A cualquier americano, luego temblarán mis pies.
Countless books, documentaries, television series, and Hollywood movies have been produced about the history of the West, or the Wild West, as it is often referred to. They are often highlighted by biographies and exploits of such individuals as Frank and Jesse James and the Younger Brothers, Billy the Kid, Wild Bill Hitchcock, and Calamity Jane. The history of the West is a history of multi-ethnic relations and conflict. The lives of indigenous people, such as Geronimo and Sitting Bull, are usually portrayed as either noble savages or barbaric heathens. For the most part, they are depicted as a hindrance to civilization and progress. Anti-Chinese violence and racism was rampant in the Wild West. Black cowboys also play a prominent role in the history of the West and its development. An ethnic group that is either ignored or stereotyped is Chicanos. Theirs is a history that has been lost. This documentary will focus on the life of the 19th century California outlaw, Tiburcio Vasquez. Through his life, we can begin to understand the Mexican experience in the United States after the American takeover of the Southwest in 1848. Many other Mexicans had conflicts with the Anglo-American legal and political system and became folk heroes to many Mexicans. Juan Cheno Cortina was such an individual. His conflict with the law began in Brownsville, Texas in 1859 when he stopped a white sheriff from beating a Mexican in the head with the butt of his pistol. An argument ensued and Cortina shot the sheriff. This incident sparked a full-fledged 2-year Mexican rebellion that was not quelled until federal troops were deployed to the area. In the 1880s, a secretive Mexican organization known as the Gorras Blancas, the White Hats, fought against the encroachment by speculators, homesteaders, railroads, and government of their communal lands and way of life. Their tactics included tearing up railroad tracks, cutting down fences, and burning crops. One of the most famous and well-known Mexican outlaws of the Old West was Joaquin Murrieta of California. It is difficult to ascertain his true identity because of the many inaccuracies in books and articles written about him, that he has become an almost mythical figure. According to Chicano scholars, this is an authentic photograph of him. These are artistic and creative images of Joaquin. Supposedly, the California Rangers killed him in 1853. They decapitated him and placed his head and the hand of his cohort, Three-Finger Jack, in a jar. The head and hand became an instant commercial and touring curiosity where the public paid money to view them. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo of 1848 ended the war between the United States and Mexico. It provided for California, New Mexico, Arizona, and parts of Utah and Colorado to become states. Mexicans who remained became U.S. citizens, and they retained all their rights of property legal under Mexican law. Tiburcio Vázquez was born in 1835 in Monterey, California. His grandfather was the mayor of San Jose in the early 1800s.
The thing that most people don't understand about Tiburcio Vázquez is that he was not at all a bandito. He was an outlaw. He was outside the law. But everything that he did was honorable, unlike banditos who often are given to their own wiles. He was not a mean man. He was not malicious. He certainly didn't kill people. He wasn't mean to children. He didn't kick dogs that we know of.
I don't want to romanticize him. Because as I mentioned, when he se metió, con la esposa de otro, I mean, that was wrong.
I don't think necessarily that he was. I mean, it's impossible to tell because all these layers have been put over him. But I think that he did some things that sort of, was because of his situation. I don't think he said, I'm taking this cause on for my people.
There was no justice. And so consequently, there was one that here in Los Angeles, although there was a overwhelming Mexican majority, the sheriffs were almost always white. You had a sheriff that was Mexican that dealt just with Mexicans, but he had no authority over white people.
There's a lot of scholars who say, not enough people focus on Mexicanos who are lynched, but there's a lot that, extra legal recourse that Anglos resort to. One was lynching, taking people out of the jails before they were even tried and hung.
At the time that Tiburcio Vázquez was coming, you had greaser laws. You had vagrancy laws where they could put you into jail and they would farm you out to places that needed labor, convict labor.
Vagrancy laws, Mexicanos were picked up and thrown in jail, oftentimes at some of their fiestas, some of their parties, when the police would just come and pick up Mexicanos, or Mexicanos who enjoyed spending Sunday at the local plaza were also picked up by the Anglo-American sheriff, the chief of police, and they were harassed in their communities, in their neighborhoods.
A spirit of hatred and revenge took possession of me. I had numerous fights in defense of what I believed to be my rights and those of my countrymen. I believed that we were being unjustly deprived of the social rights that belonged to us. I got my mother's blessing and told her I was going out into the world.
It's a book that was written by the British historian Eric Hobsbawm, Marxist historian, who talked about primitive rebels or social banditry, in that these were people who came from a community. These were primarily individuals who had difficulties with law enforcement, either the courts or the police, and they became, quote, outlaws, bandits. He oftentimes would rob, quote, from the rich and give to the poor, the kind of the Robin Hood image of these rebels, and they protected the community, and the community protected them, and they became like heroes.
I was wounded 11 times. I received 8 wounds when I was captured. I was shot in the hand when I escaped from San Quintin, in the neck by Salazar at San Juan, and in the breast by the constable of Santa Cruz.
He saw himself, I believe, as a young Simón Bolívar, and I think he saw himself as a Don Quixote as well. Perhaps not as futile as Don Quixote was tilling at windmills, but rather a Simón Bolívar who could save a nation.
White men heaped wrong on me in Monterey County. Given $60,000, I would be able to recruit enough arms and men to revolutionize Southern California.
He was an idealist who, like Socrates, would rather die but give up his rights. They sold tickets to his hanging. They assigned seats in an auditorium style where they built up this grandstand all around St. James Park. They actually sold seats to watch the spectacle. I mean, that's all it became. It became a circus. It was a spectacle.
Standing on the gallows, Tiburcio turned his head to aid Sheriff Adams in adjusting the noose. He uttered one word, "Pronto." Tiburcio Vasquez was dead.
Well, why do we still know about him today? He became a really important folk hero for people. So, and I think that was more, maybe even though I'm a historian, I think like when we talk about stories of the past, memories, so much the nitty-gritty facts aren't as important as how people remember him. You know, so how people remember him and the power behind his story and his legend, I think, is more important sometimes.
Okay, that was Tiburcio Vasquez. Now, I would like to conclude this presentation with an organization that was comprised of a community of resistance. And they are known as Las Gorras Blancas, the White Hats. I will read the opening paragraph to New Mexico's Office of the State Historian on Las Gorras Blancas of San Miguel County. Now, the Office of the State Historian is a division of New Mexico's Commission of Public Records and part of the State Records Center and Archives. I'm just going to read to you the official statement written by historian David Correa. It's a long statement, but I'll just just do the introduction so that we can share the significance of Las Gorras Blancas. From February 1889 until the summer of 1891, a clandestine organization of night riders known as Las Gorras Blancas cut the fences and burned the barns of ranchers, enclosing the Las Vegas land grant commons, and destroyed railroad ties and burned bridges in a related effort to disrupt the railroad, the foundation of commercial development of the land grant. Historians of New Mexico have viewed the clash between Las Gorras Blancas and commercial elites in racial and class terms. The fence cutters in New Mexico engaged in a conscious and extra-legal challenge to the newly emerging economic order in New Mexico, an order founded on the coercive power of the range enclosures to establish durable private property rights buttressed by the power of the railroad to concentrate commercial power. The goal of Las Gorras Blancas was not merely the eradication of barbed wire fences, but the destruction of the underlying logic and ideology that fueled the commercial and industrial transformation of New Mexico. Las Gorras Blancas sought to develop a class-based consciousness amongst local people through the everyday tactics of resistance to the economic and social order confronting common property land grant communities. In reaction to the white cap outrages, as the group's campaign of fence cutting came to be referred, local economic and political elites engaged in a retaliatory pattern of widespread rural repression. And this was Las Gorras Blancas, a group from New Mexico who were trying to defend their land titles, their land grants, as should have been honored by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. They will lose their lands. Let's go to a documentary that helps us appreciate the importance of Las Gorras Blancas to New Mexico's Latino population.
In 1878, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad steamed across the American plains into the U.S. territory of New Mexico. Settled in 1598, New Mexico was the largest and oldest Spanish settlement in the Southwest, and where the culture of Latinos remained strong.
The institutions of the society were deep in New Mexico. There was a deeply rooted insistence on maintaining the Spanish language, Spanish cultural traditions, Spanish religious traditions.
In the 30 years since the end of the Mexican-American War, the Hispano elite in New Mexico had preserved much of its economic and political standing, even as Californios and Tejanos had been overwhelmed by American expansion.
New Mexico is, in a sense, spared the violence of Texas and of California because it's a desert. I mean, there's basically nothing there that these new settlers, these incoming Anglo settlers want.
There's so many more Mexican Americans in New Mexico than there were in California or in Texas at the dawn of the US-Mexico War. These are communities that are bigger, that are settled, that have been there longer, and that really made a difference.
There were families that were land-holding families who sent their children off to school at Harvard, in St. Louis, in the Midwest, and who came back littered in English and littered in Spanish, who took their place and had leadership positions.
Miguel Antonio Otero, a wealthy Hispano, had studied law at St. Louis University. Elected delegate to the U.S. Congress, Otero was instrumental in bringing the railroad into northern New Mexico. For Otero and the New Mexican elites, the railroad brought economic progress, connecting the territory to Kansas and Chicago. But for many Nuevo Mexicanos, it was a threat.
In other places, only gentry had land. But in New Mexico, the lands that were not privately held were held in common, and they were open. They were open to be used by whomever.
With the railroad came Anglo cattle ranchers, and with the ranchers came barbed wire that now cut through lands held in common by Nuevo Mexicanos.
There's a saying in Spanish, con el alambre vino el hambre. With barbed wire came hunger, because the lands that had been used to graze animals and to raise crops were fenced off.
When people came to realize that they were losing their lands, they fought back.
Three brothers, Pablo, Nicanor, and Juan Jose Herrera, organized a resistance movement to protect 500,000 acres of land from encroachment by cattle ranchers. They wore hoods to mask their identity and called themselves Las Gorras Blancas, the White Caps.
The Gorras Blancas may have been as large as 1,100 men. They don't hesitate to take matters into their own hand and to defend their rights with a gun.
Riding by moonlight, they tore up track, burned railroad bridges and barns, cut miles of barbed wire.
My great-grandfather had to leave his home community and move upstream to Las Vegas on the Santa Fe Trail because his lands had been expropriated by Anglo-American occupiers. And though there are no stories in the family about them resisting that, the likelihood is that they were part of the fence cutters and the barn burners.
Letters from ranchers complaining about the outrages of fence cutters in San Miguel County rained on the governor of the U.S. territory of New Mexico. Crimes were being committed, and the community as a whole has little or no protection, wrote County Clerk Miguel Antonio Otero, son of the man who brought the railroad to New Mexico. But others blamed the violence on the greed of land grabbers. When in November 1889, the Herrera brothers and 44 other so-called fence cutters were arrested, the local newspaper noted, "It will be a very difficult matter to obtain a jury who can be persuaded to punish their fellow citizens for acts, though illegal, they in their own hearts feel to be right." The charges against Las Gorras Blancas were dismissed. They disbanded in 1891. The fencing at San Miguel County stopped. But in a matter of decades, only a few thousand acres remained of the 500,000-acre Las Vegas land grant.
Every family in New Mexico has a story about, oh, we used to own a lot of land. Well, what happened to that land? Well, we don't own it anymore. Well, what happened to it? Well, we don't know. It was lost somehow.
Las Gorras Blancas could not protect the lands of Nuevo Mexicanos, but they made history in a different way, helping to set a precedent of Latino resistance to injustice. Nuevo Mexicanos continued to fight for their rights as American citizens in a conquered territory. County Clerk Miguel Antonio Otero was appointed governor by U.S. President William McKinley and served for 2 terms. The leader of Las Gorras Blancas, Juan Jose Herrera, traded his white cap for a vested suit and was elected probate judge of San Miguel County.
New Mexico is unique among all the southwestern United States in having substantial political participation on the part of the Hispanic people.
Well into the 20th century, people of Mexican ancestry continue to be the numerical majority in New Mexico. And because they are the majority, they have a very different experience than, say, the Tejanos or the Californios.
In Sonoma, California, on a small estate he called Lacrima Montis, Tears of the Mountain, Mariano Vallejo spent his waning years. Stripped of his influence and fortune, he made a modest living selling water from a reservoir behind his home. Vallejo died in 1890 after completing a 5-volume history to uphold the legacy of Californios and his own place as one of California's founding fathers. The survivor of El Alamo, Juan Seguin, retired to Mexico where he died, forgotten, in 1890. 80 years later, his remains were brought to Texas and buried with honors. In his memoirs, Seguin called himself a foreigner in my own land and spoke for tens of thousands of Latinos, now second-class citizens, in a land that had once been theirs.
This ends the segment of the segment on resistance.